Okay, students, in this particular part of the video, we're going to revisit what we were just doing. If you didn't watch part 1, then part 2 is not going to make a whole lot of sense. But what we just finished doing was adding some currency to our spreadsheet and looked at the different ways that Excel and Google Sheets responded. You'll notice that in both cases, both of them kept the currency symbol in. There's Google Sheets. Google Sheets decided that it was going to chop off the 0, but you'll notice in the formula bar it contained everything. Excel decided it was going to display the 0, but only keep the essential information in the background. So two different ways of handling it, and you will find that many spreadsheets will decide to handle it differently depending on how it was created. You just have to understand all the basic operations involved and different formatting techniques so that you can tweak your particular spreadsheet to the way you want things to display and function. So let's take a look at what else we can do here. Let's say that Excel was nice. I like the 1750. It's money. That's great. But Google Sheets, I'm not crazy about this. One of the things we can do is we can format this cell a particular way, or we can choose some numerical formatting to kind of coerce our values into displaying the way that we want them to. In Excel, as we see, it's probably fine. We don't need to worry about it. Google Sheets, obviously we do. So how would we do that if we wanted to alter the way something displayed? Well, it really depends on your spreadsheet. You may have to look around to see where things are in your particular spreadsheet, but the most important thing to know is that the options are there. So as long as you know the options are there, you have the ability to change the formatting, then you at least know what to look for. So even if you pick up a new spreadsheet someday and you've never used it, you can at least go in with the understanding that, hey, I know that I can format these values, I can make them display different ways. Let me go figure out where that option is. In Google Sheets, we see on the toolbar, we see this 1, 2, 3, and if I hover over it, it says more formats. Before that, you'll see I have a little percent symbol, and it says format as percent. Here I have a $sign, and it says format as currency. Now we may already think that it would be displayed as currency, but if I click that, you'll notice, it just took the $sign before, and now it's actually displaying it as currency. If I bring this down, I can see the different ways that Google Sheets is going to allow me to display this value. And there's quite a few options that I have here. Here I can see more currencies, a lot of different financial options there. So the different ways that I could actually format this. If I go into Excel, if I right-click on any particular cell, there's always a Format Cells option. And if I go to Format Cells in Excel, what I'll see here is at the top I have a number tab, and then I have a category box a little bit lower, and in the category box I have a listing of all the different types of numbers that I could possibly have. You'll notice currency is selected. Now I didn't come into this box before and I didn't select currency, so how did Excel know that I was dealing with currency? Well, that's because we added the $sign when we typed that in part 1 of the video. By adding the $sign, Excel knew that I was dealing with currency. So you can see it's already displaying it as currency. And by default, Excel is going to display my currency with 2 decimal places. If I didn't want that, let's say I didn't want the 0, I could change that. I could display it by 1 decimal place, and you notice that in the sample area it's showing me an updated version of that. Obviously I do want the 2 decimal places because that's the way it would normally appear. But you do have the option. If you wanted 3 decimal places, you could add that as well. We're really not dealing with parts of a sentence in this particular case, so we would leave it as is. You notice Excel also gives us some different options for negative numbers. In many cases, you may want to display negative numbers in different ways. In accounting, if we're not dealing with color, we will often put negative values in parentheses. So you can see here that we have that particular option. In many cases, when you have negatives, you are in the red. That's where that phrase comes from. If you're in the red, that means you have a negative value. So Excel also allows us to display things in red. And it also allows us to display things in normal fashion, but with the negative. A mathematician, for example, might be a little bit more used to seeing the number display there as well. Display like that. So those are some of the different options that we have in Excel. In Google Sheets, I do have some options as well. You'll notice if I right-click, I don't necessarily have the same options as I did in Excel. Like I said before, depending on the spreadsheet that you're working with, you actually have to go and figure out where these options are. Some spreadsheets might give you more options than others. Excel seems to give me a lot of options. Google Sheets doesn't give me as many options, and there's reasons for that. But if I wanted to, I could change the way I want to display this value. If I didn't want any decimal points, you notice Excel gives me an option here. This value is currency but it has no decimal places. And this particular value is currency but has 2 decimal places. These are the 2 common ways we might display currency. You notice if I do select this option, what Google Sheets actually does is, although it keeps the 1750 in the background, it actually rounds my value. So it's displaying 18, but it's also going to retain the actual value. We could do the same thing in Excel. If I chose to format the cells, I could limit the number of decimal places to 0, and you notice Excel is going to show me an 18, and 18 is what I see. But if I look in the formula bar, I actually see the value that I entered. So 17.5 is the value that is being retained in the cell. That's important because although I might visually want to see something different, when I perform calculations, I might actually want the actual value. Now that's for you to decide. If you actually wanted the 18 to be performed or be used in calculations, well then you really need to treat that number differently. Or there's some other things that you could possibly do to make sure that you're using the 18. But if you just want to display things certain ways but retain their value, this is the way you go about it. Now, currency is not the only type of value that has this issue. There's many of different types of values. For example, another type of value is a date. And when we enter dates in Excel, Excel is going to treat them a little bit differently. And there's many different ways of formatting a date. I'm sure you could, off the top of your head, think of several. So let's explore this a little bit. How would a date be displayed in a spreadsheet? So let's say I'm entering the date of, well, if I was just entering a day, I might just say Monday. Obviously that's just textual information, so Excel is just going to left format that and just treat it like any other text. But what if I actually put an actual date here? Instead of a day, I want an actual date. So let's say I'm creating this video on September 21st, 2013. So let's say I enter 9/21/2013 and I hit enter. What is Excel going to do with this? Well, you'll notice that Excel right aligned my date, and as we saw before, Excel does right align numbers, whereas it left aligns textual information. Again, you're free to overwrite that if you want, but that's what it does by default. If I went over to Google Sheets and I decided to do the same thing, we notice that the same behavior exists here. Now if I go up and I look in the background of my cell, here I have the date, just as I entered it. If I go over here to Excel, I have the date just as I entered it. Very good. Not a lot of difficulty there. But what if I wanted to actually take this date and format it a different way? Well, I can go to my Format Cells option. I apologize if that's hanging off your screen just a tad bit, or off the video. Let's pull that back in. Notice Excel did pick up the fact that this is a date. And there are different ways of entering the date. It picked up the way that I chose, but that doesn't mean that I can't pick another way. And Excel actually has quite a few different ways that it can display dates. So depending on your application or your preference, you may want to display it a different way. So here I actually want the day first, and then I want the month kind of abbreviated in the middle, and then the year. And you can see here that Excel, from the actual date information that I gave it, can pick up what the month is. You notice I didn't put September anywhere. I did put 9, but Excel was able to pick up the fact that the 9 represented September. So I could choose that format if I wanted to. I could choose some other formats if I want to. Here's a little bit more formal option. So I could say September 20. Oh, wait a minute. What's going on here? I thought I was picking something that would say September 21st, 2003, and I got all these pound symbols. That must mean that there's a big problem with my spreadsheet. Initially, when people see something like this in their spreadsheet, they think this is a problem. And it's actually not a problem. The pound symbol there repeated through the cell really is just an indicator that your particular column that you have right now is a little bit too small to display the value that it wants to display. So instead of ruining the value by chopping it off or anything, it's giving you a visual like this to say, if you want this value to display, you really need to make your column bigger. So all I really need to do is increase the size of my column here, and you can see now I have my date. Now, how does Google Sheets behave when I do something like this? Does it give me the same options as Excel? Likely no. So let's see what we do have. If I look down here, I can see that I have some date options here. Not a whole lot here. I have a date, kind of just the way I entered it. I have a time, a date and a time, a number of hours. Let's look at the more formats here. I also have some other ways of displaying my date. And you can see it's a fairly long list. It's not as long as some spreadsheets might give you, but it's not terrible. And this is pretty comparable to what I had before in Excel. Let's pick that. You can see here that Google Sheets prefers more of a wrapping style if things go past the column length. And some might appreciate that. Others don't. They don't really like the size of the row being changed on them. So it's really just a matter of personal preference, but if I increase the size of that column, obviously I get the whole date appearing on the same line. So that's a date. What about some other things? What about percentages and other values like that? Well, that's something that you can play around with. You can add percents and you can add other values and see how they will display. If you take a look at the formatting options that you have, you can see that there's all different types of ways different values can display. And it's not just in Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. Any particular spreadsheet is going to offer you different ways of formatting your values. You can see here that in Excel I have a lot of different categories. I have scientific, fraction, percentages, time, accounting, currency, all different ways of displaying my values. Over time, we're going to get into different values and look at the way that they format. But I think for now, we've seen enough. We know that different values can be displayed. We know different formats can take place.